Hello, I'm Laleh, and this is Nazananin, and we're graduate students at UC Berkeley, and we're pleased to have with us today Raka Ray, who is an associate professor here at UC Berkeley's Departments of Sociology and South and Southeast Asian Studies. She's also an affiliated faculty member with the Women's Studies program, as well as the chair of the Center for South Asia Studies. Raka was born and raised in Calcutta. She came to the US in the early 80s to pursue university study and eventually received her PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Since then, she's published a number of articles as well as authoring the book Fields of Protest, Women's Movements in India.
In addition to her extensive academic work, Raka spent years producing and hosting the weekly radio program, Third World View at Wisconsin, and she's currently a member of the Coalition Against Communalism, a local Bay Area organization that struggles against sectarianism in South Asia. So thank you, Raka, for being with us today. And, well, you've done a wide range of research on topics such as girls' education in India, women's movements, and more recently, domestic servitude. So it's clear that you are committed to issues of inequality, particularly in relation to women. What was it that led you to sociology as a way of addressing these concerns?
Why sociology? I think that starting from when I was in college, it became very clear that sociology was the subject that actually addressed all of the things that caused me to worry in my life. Right, the issues of inequality, a variety of social problems, from people being denied their rights to people not being able to articulate their rights. So economic and cultural issues, the things that in my growing up I always thought of as in terms of this is fair and this is not fair. Sociology was the subject that made me understand what fairness and unfairness actually meant at a societal level, and it made me understand. I think sociology actually gave me the concept of social structure, which actually crystallized everything about all of these problems that sort of pricked my social consciousness. That there is this thing called social structure, that the things. The problems out there in the world that affect one person or another person aren't there because it's their fault, or it isn't there to some random arbitrary, because some random arbitrary chance. But there's this thing called social structure, that there is a way in which people who are like me live in the same way and suffer from the same problems or enjoy the same privileges as I do. And that's not because of happenstance or chance. It's because of the way society is structured. So that actually was the key that turned me on to sociology. And frankly, that's also why I like teaching Sociology 1 or Introduction to Sociology so much. Because to me, if I can look at a group of 250 young people who've just come to college in America, who've thought of themselves primarily as individuals, and I can make them see that they certainly are individuals, but really, but more importantly than that, they're actually part of a social fabric and a certain set of social rules and a social structure. Then I feel like I've been able to teach them something. Sorry, long answer to.
No,
That's great.
Lovely answer.
Well, it's obvious that you're also passionately committed to women's issues and struggles. Where does that commitment come from?
Well, where does that come from? I mean, the banal answer is that comes obviously from, living or inhabiting the body of a woman, and going through the cultural expectations of a woman, and for some reason or another, simply not liking it. Recognizing that something along the way was not right or not fair. Recognizing that the things that I wanted for myself, or the dreams that I wanted for myself, weren't supposed to be available to me. So these sorts of at gut level annoyances, right? That begin to pile up, and then you begin to think that they're actually more than annoyances. They are reflections of much larger social forces. So that actually is what, from a very early age, before I ever learned what the word oppression was or what feminism was, it was a gut level rejection of what I found unfair. And I've realized I've used this word already 5 times. But I think that there's a reason for that. There's a reason for this. I think that it's been a driving principle in my life. This dislike of things that are that is unfair. Right. So, yeah.
Well, you've done, as Nazanin had been saying, you've done a wide range of work over the course of your career. What we'd like to focus today on is your book, Fields of Protest. So we'd like to start by first just asking you why it was important to you to write a book about women's movements in India.
Actually, that's 2 questions. I think the first is why it was important for me to write about women's movements at all. And I'd like to answer that first. And the second is why women's movements in India. As Nazanin said, when I first began, as a young, through my college and then my MA thesis, I was very interested in generally in questions of how women came to accept the way they are, or how they were taught to accept the way they are. So my work on education was very much about how institutions, in some sense, try to impart certain cultural hegemonic or certain dominant cultural understandings to men and to women. And as I study sort of the field of education and gender, or men and women, I came to be frustrated. I began to realize that what I really wanted to do, what really drove me, was the possibility of social change. I wanted to take these schools and to change the ways that they dealt with the girls within them. And that interest in social change is what led me to study social movements. I realized that I had begun to see myself women as being shaped by the school, as being shaped by these various institutions. But at the back of my mind, I knew that women actually just weren't like that. They were fighters, and they were vibrant, and they were struggling. And so I thought, okay, well, let me get away from sort of falling into this trap of seeing women as these passive victims, and let me look at what they're doing collectively to, in fact, change their lives. So that's what led me to the study of women's movements. And what led me to the study of women's movements in India, of course, is, I'm from India. And having come here at the age of 18, I realized that India occupies this sort of special position, I think, in the sort of Western or American imaginary. It is the land of the terribly poor, the land of the terribly victimized. It's the land of people who are Hindu and therefore fatalistic. It is the land of vibrant colors. It is also the land of a few unique individuals, right? And so part of why I wanted to talk, and particularly it is the land where women are terribly oppressed. Whenever the New York Times covers the elections in India, there'll be this picture of veiled women. Right. What a shock, veiled women going to vote. Or there's often pictures of women crying because of some terrible disaster that has befallen them. Right? So in some sense I was reacting to that as well. And so why women's movements in India? I wanted to actually give a much more well-rounded, well-thought-out, present a more well-thought-out vision of the political, cultural, economic life of Indian women.
Because you actually, in the introduction you talk about how we have a tendency in the West either ignore and not see women's movements in other parts of the world, or to dismiss them easily, or or even to romanticize them in some cases, right? So either this kind of passive victim situation or this heroine image of women. So how do you feel like the book was, how do you feel that the book actually pushes us to think differently about it?
I think that the first thing that the book does is, I don't think there are any heroes in my book. I think what you get rather are lots and lots of ordinary women. Extraordinary,
Extraordinary,
yet ordinary, right?
women.
Yes. Who are constantly rethinking their own position, their lives, trying to analyze their experience, trying to reach out to help other women, to connect with other women, and trying to figure out how to strategize, how to make a difference in the political world. So I hope that what I've done is shown at least just a tiny slice of all that women who simply want to improve their lives, how they work together collectively to do so. And just to go back to something that you said, Laleh, I feel like the women that are presented in the media are, as you said, either heroines or victims. There is no collective representation of them at all. Or rather, there is a collective representation of them, but only as collective victims, not as collective actors. So you get the collective victims, and then you get the individual actors. So that's really the intervention I hope I've made.
Well, for this research, you also chose to compare women's movements in your own hometown, Calcutta, with those in Bombay. What led you to this comparison?
I traveled around India to various cities, working with the various women's movements there. And while I was just there, working in these various women's groups in these various cities, I was also just reading about them, thinking about them, traveling with them, working with them. And it became very clear to me that there was this disjuncture, there was a disjunction between what I came to see and know and what was being presented. What was being presented was the city of Bombay or Delhi or even Bangalore, three important Indian cities, as the cities where feminism or feminist movements in India were alive and thriving and blossoming. Calcutta was absolutely absent. Now, Calcutta is the city in which I grew up. Calcutta is a politically tempestuous city. And it did not, therefore, this information or this invisibility of Calcutta in the representation of the women's movement, both in the West and within India.
Within India as well.
And within India as well. Very much disturbed me, and I wanted to understand why this was the case.
You actually interviewed 70 active women in women's movements, both in Bombay and Calcutta. And one of the questions that you asked them all was that what did they think were the most important issues that women in India were facing? So what were their responses, and how did they articulate their major concerns?
Well, that really became one of the findings of my book, that and that helped me actually answer the question I went in, why is Calcutta absent? The women in Calcutta tended to disproportionately say that the most important issues that affect women in India are employment, poverty, and literacy. And the women in Bombay seemed disproportionately to talk about issues of violence, reproductive rights, and family. Now, the ironic thing is that there isn't much difference between Calcutta and Bombay in the levels of employment. So it's not that in Calcutta they wanted daycare centers because so many women were in the labor force versus in Bombay. There's not much difference objectively in the life situations of women in Calcutta and the women in Bombay, and the lives of women in Bombay. Yet they really articulated to me different issues as being central to them, right? So that so the first thing I realized then, with this sort of this aha moment, is that precisely because women and the women activists in Calcutta articulated issues of employment and poverty and literacy as being the most crucial, this explained its relative absence in the discussions of women's movements. Because in fact, women's movements have become much more narrowly defined, or women's issues, I should say, have become much more narrowly defined as having to do with issues of the body, whether it's sexuality or violence or reproduction. And somehow, even though people say it, you'll hear periodically people say, well, poverty is a women's issue too. But they don't really mean it. That is groups that actually take women's poverty, women's women's wages, women's literacy as the most important issues, weren't somehow considered sufficiently feminist, right? As a result of which, in the discussions of the women's movement, Calcutta was absent, because the issues that women in Calcutta articulated as the most important weren't the issues that were considered legitimately feminist.
And well, as you said, many people don't consider issues related to employment or access to resources such as electricity and water as being women's issues. They consider them to be general economic problems. So the first question, what led you to categorize them as women's issues?
Well, I think that what is a woman, right? A woman is a person who can be a soldier, a nun, a prostitute, a housewife, a daughter, a sister, a teacher, right? So any of these issues that affect her has to be considered a legitimate issue. Her in all of these roles, right? So if women feel like the most important thing in their life right now is that they are unable to go to work because they have no safe place for their baby, how can you not consider that a feminist issue? Or if women feel like the most important thing in their life is that neither they nor their husbands together earn enough money to pay their rent.
Right.
How do you dismiss that as an issue? Now, is it so? It's a woman's issue, right?
There's one wonderful example in your book where you're talking about an organization in Calcutta that initially, and not particularly for women, but initially began offering literacy project, and that it turned out that it was women that came in numbers and responded to that, and so that in a sense the women themselves turned literacy into a women's issue.
I'm really glad you reminded me of that. Yes, that's actually a classical example. They didn't go in; they just went in thinking you can't have a developed country without more literacy, so they went in really to create mass level literacy, and it was women who came in, and women had very specific reasons for coming in. They wanted to help their children with their homework. They wanted to know what their husband was signing. There were very specific reasons, and they turned it into a women's issue. And then these women, these activists actually realized that some of these women weren't being allowed to come to these literacy classes. And so the activists also then turned that into a women's issue. That is, why are these women not being allowed to attend these classes? And so they go to these families and they find that the men are getting a little worried. That the women either are out too late, who knows what they're doing, or they are learning too much and they're overtaking them, and so their control over women women is slipping. So in this way, there are so many political issues of rights, of control, of power, that the simple issue of literacy illuminates, right? So this was one of the classic cases where it was started not as a women's issue at all. It became a women's issue, and then the activists learned how much more of a women's issue it really was.
Yeah. Right.
Well,
Yeah.
this thing actually teaches us to expand our notion of women's issues and interests. But I still have one more question about this
Yes,
thing.
absolutely.
And that is, although Calcutta and Bombay were not different in the sense that there were no objective differences,
Yeah.
as you pointed out. So why was it that in Bombay they were articulating their concerns differently? Why? What accounts for this difference between women's issues in both cities?
What accounts for the difference in women's issues in both cities is that the political environment of the two cities is very different. And that's really what most of my book is about. It is in elaborating the importance of understanding the political environment within which groups must operate. That is, I think we've moved beyond an understanding of, okay, how does something become a political issue in this country? How did abortion become a political issue? It's not like it's a political issue because it's a problem, right? There are many problems that don't really become political issues. Malaria, starvation, there are many problems that don't become political issues, and then there are certain problems that become political issues. And that's what I became really interested in when I realized that, well, violence against women is a problem in Calcutta, but it doesn't become a political issue there. Certainly poverty is a problem in Bombay, but it doesn't become a political issue. So I began to really think about what enables something to move into the realm of a legitimate political issue. And I realized that very often when we study social movements of any kind, we're really looking at the social movement itself, the activists within it, perhaps the national state which is being targeted, as opposed to the immediate local political environment within which the movements must operate. The name I gave them in the book is political fields. That is, there are each environment, whether it's let's say in this case each city has a certain political culture. It considers certain things legitimately political and not legitimately political. Also within each environment, there are some environments where many political organizations have power, and some environments in which power is concentrated. Only a couple of organizations have power. So the political context, the environment of Calcutta and Bombay are in many ways drastically different. The political environment in Calcutta, I call it a hegemonic environment. It's controlled by the Communist Party of India, Marxist, the CPIM, which has won every election since 1977. Right? So it's a democratically elected, thank you, government in a multi-party democracy. So it has not been there for so long, and it is so popular. Sure, there are dissidents, and sure, there are many things people don't like about it, but it has legitimacy. It is seen to at least some extent, or more than any other party, to actually represent the interests of the people. So this party then, it's a communist party, so it does see material and economic interests as the most important, and the women's movements therefore go along with it. Even the women's movements that oppose the party, even the women's groups that oppose the party have accepted that these are the most important issues. In Bombay, on the other hand, until very recently, until after my book was written, actually, there has been no dominant force. It's what I call it's a fragmented field. That is, lots of parties come and go, lots of ideas are allowed to flourish, influences from the West, influences from other parts of India. It's far more open.
So you don't have to adjust yourself with just this one.
That's right.
dominant
So you can just have, there's been a lot of different issues that are allowed to flourish. So that sort of explains why different issues flourished in each of the different cities.
So, Raka, in your book, you actually give us a number of excerpts from interviews with women, and many of them we found to be really interesting in terms of just pushing us to rethink what we think counts as politics and what counts as political struggle. So maybe if you could just say a little bit about, in your own process in doing the research, how some of these women really pushed you in terms of how you think about politics.
There's a woman who in Bombay who said something that I liked very much, and that is that such faith that what politics really meant, what social change really meant, is first and foremost the social imagination that it is possible, right? That it is possible to imagine a better world. It is possible to get together and figure out how to make this better world, come to pass.
So in this case, the imagining itself is a political act.
Exactly.
The forming of the collectivity is a political act.
Exactly.
So you say that for them, I mean, their activism kind of pervaded their whole lives. But you were mentioning that at the time that you went to do the research, you yourself were kind of faced with this dilemma of activism or academia, which you said that at the time you thought were mutually exclusive. What have you come to feel about that since that time?
That's a good question. So I think of myself as a scholar activist, but I do so, I think, in a broad sense. That is, a desire for social change drives everything I do. All the projects that I pick, the classes I choose to teach, how I choose to teach them, and I think in many ways it also drives the way I am in university committees. That I in that sense, it is. I have to believe that this is something that all sociologists have. If we really just thought that the society we lived in was just peachy, why would we bother becoming sociologists? We become sociologists because we feel that sense of discomfort, that we feel like there are these discordant or discrepant or unhappy or unequal elements.
Unfairness, as you like the word.
Huh? Unfairness, exactly. And that
we all were kids saying, that's unfair!
I think we were all kids saying that's unfair.
Yeah. But one last question that we'd like to ask you, that I'd like to ask you, is that if there could be one lesson that emerges from this book that could be disseminated to a larger public, what would you want that lesson to be?
Can I make it 2 lessons?
Sure.
I think that the first lesson has to be to not to dismiss, but to really look closely at the ways in which ordinary women do extraordinary things every day, collectively. They do extraordinary things on a daily basis by themselves as well, but what interests me is how you overcome just the desire to look after your interests and your family and connect with other people to make a better world, both for your family and for other people. So the ways in which millions of women do that all the time and every day. And I guess the second lesson would be that collective action, social movements, are about changing the world, but they're not sort of random, mysterious, mystical, irrational phenomenon. They are highly planned. They are highly carefully thought through. People often think about the moment that the civil rights movement in this country is sparked by the fact that Rosa Parks sat down on that bus in the front seat and refused to go to the back of the bus. When I teach my classes that Rosa Parks was in fact trained at the Highlander Center and that she had undergone all of this activist training, they're bitterly disappointed.
Because the romance is gone.
The romance is gone. And I try to show...
And the work is apparent.
And the work is apparent, exactly. And what I want to keep is both that romance, because it was a hugely important moment. But it doesn't just come like this. It's hard work, it takes a lot of planning, a lot of strategizing, and you must appreciate it for what it is. Right? So that's also what I would hope that this book would do, is not that it's produced Rosa Parks, or it talks about the Rosa Parks, but the ability to keep the romance of the social movements without losing the real hard work that goes into it.
Thank you so much, Raka.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you
your time.
for your time.
All right.